Imagine you are standing on a narrow strip of land. In front of you, the sea, cold, gray, indifferent. Behind you, a city of perhaps 8,000 people, craftsmen, merchants, farmers, mothers, children. And coming toward you, marching from the east, from the mountains, from the horizon itself, is the largest army the ancient world had ever assembled. They have already conquered Egypt. They have swallowed Babylon whole. They have bent the kings of Lydia and Media to their will. Their emperor does not negotiate. He does not offer terms. He arrives and nations kneel. And yet, this city does not kneel. This is the story of Plataea. Or rather, before Plataea, there was Phocea. And before that, there was Miletus. And before all of them, there was a single defiant spark in a corner of the world the Persians had barely noticed. A spark that refused, against every rational calculation, to go out. This is the story of the Greek city of Miletus and its doomed, brilliant, world-changing revolt against the Persian Empire. A revolt that started with pride, descended into disaster, and accidentally set in motion a chain of events that would define Western civilization for the next 2,000 years. The army that shouldn't have won eventually did. But first, everything had to fall apart. To understand why a handful of Greek city-states managed to resist the greatest empire on earth, you first need to understand just how enormous that empire was and how small the Greeks really were. The year is approximately 500 BCE. The Persian Empire, ruled by Darius the Great, stretches from the Indus River in modern-day Pakistan all the way to the shores of the Aegean Sea. We are talking about a territory of nearly 5 million square kilometers, an area larger than the entire continental United States. Under Persian control, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, Thrace, and dozens of other kingdoms and peoples. The Persian king was not merely a political ruler. He was, in the official theology of the empire, the representative of Ahura Mazda, the god of light and order, on earth. When Darius issued a decree, it was not just law. It was cosmic truth. Defiance was not merely treason. It was heresy. Now zoom out and look at the Greeks. There is no Greek nation. There is no Greek empire. There is not even a Greek government. What exists, scattered across the coastline of the Aegean Sea and the islands within it, is a loose collection of independent city-states, polis, each with their own laws, their own gods, their own calendars, their own armies. They argue with each other constantly. They fight each other regularly. Athens looks down on Corinth. Sparta distrusts everyone. Thebes harbors its own ambitions. These cities are, by any objective military measure, tiny. Athens in 500 BCE has a population of perhaps 30,000 citizens. Sparta might field 6,000 heavy infantry on a good day. The entire combined Greek world could barely muster what Darius could lose in a single skirmish and not notice. And yet, geography matters. Culture matters. And most of all, desperation matters. Because on the western coast of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, there is a strip of land called Ionia. And Ionia is Greek. These are Greek cities: Miletus, Ephesus, Halicarnassus, Phocea, founded by Greek colonists centuries earlier, now living under Persian rule. They speak Greek. They worship Greek gods. They practice Greek democracy, or at least they used to. Because Persia, being Persia, has replaced many of the democratic governments of these Ionian cities with tyrants, hand-picked rulers loyal to Darius, answerable to Sardis, the Persian regional capital. Men who collect Persian taxes, enforce Persian law, and suppress any whiff of rebellion before it can breathe. For a generation, this arrangement holds. The Ionians grumble. They prosper. Miletus, in particular, is one of the wealthiest trading cities in the Mediterranean. But prosperity under the boot of a master is still the boot of a master. And beneath the surface of compliance, resentment quietly pools. All it will take is one man with too much ambition and too little wisdom to set it all ablaze. His name is Aristagoras, and he is the acting tyrant of Miletus. In roughly 499 BCE, Aristagoras is in a difficult position. He has recently backed a military expedition, a Persian-backed attempt to restore a group of exiled oligarchs to the island of Naxos, that has failed spectacularly. The expedition was expensive. It was embarrassing. And now Aristagoras owes both his Persian overlords and his own reputation a debt he cannot easily repay. What does an ambitious man do when he has backed the wrong horse and the walls are closing in? He starts a revolution. Aristagoras makes a calculation. The Persian yoke is unpopular. The Greek cities of Ionia are restless. If he could ignite a rebellion, cast himself not as a failed opportunist, but as a liberator, he might survive. He might even thrive. He begins by doing something remarkable. He renounces his own tyranny. He dismantles his own government, installs democratic institutions in Miletus, and sends word to the other Ionian cities to do the same. It is a masterstroke of propaganda. Suddenly, he is not a desperate man covering his tracks. He is a champion of freedom. The Ionian cities respond. Their own tyrants are expelled. Democracy takes root along the coast. And for one brief, electric moment, it seems as though the impossible might happen, that Ionia might actually shake off the Persian hand. But Aristagoras is not naive enough to think the Ionians can stand alone. He needs help. Real help. Military help. And so he does what any Greek in trouble does. He sails west. He goes first to Sparta. And here, one of history's most extraordinary conversations takes place. Aristagoras comes to the court of King Cleomenes I of Sparta. He brings a bronze map, a remarkably advanced geographic tool for the era, and he lays it out. He points to Ionia. He points to Lydia. He traces the royal road, the great Persian highway that runs from Sardis all the way to Susa, the imperial capital. He describes the wealth that could be seized, the glory that could be won. Cleomenes is interested, perhaps more than interested. And then, in a detail that Herodotus preserves for us with almost cinematic clarity, Cleomenes asks a practical question. How far is it from the Ionian coast to Susa, the Persian capital? And Aristagoras, with the fatal honesty of a desperate man who has miscalculated, tells the truth. About 3 months' march. 3 months. Cleomenes stares at him. Then he tells Aristagoras to leave Sparta before sundown. The Spartans will not come. 3 months from the sea? That is madness. Sparta does not march its precious hoplites into the heart of Asia on the promise of distant glory. Sparta thinks in decades. Sparta survives by being cautious. Aristagoras leaves Sparta and goes to Athens. And Athens, newly democratic, freshly proud, still riding the energy of having expelled its own tyrant Hippias just a decade earlier, says yes. Athens agrees to send 20 ships. A small force. Almost symbolic. But a force nonetheless. The die is cast. Herodotus, writing decades later, would call those 20 ships the beginning of evils for both Greeks and barbarians. It is one of the most chilling sentences in all of ancient historiography. Because he was right. The Ionian revolt begins with a remarkable early success. In 498 BCE, the combined Ionian and Athenian forces march inland toward Sardis, the great Persian administrative capital of western Anatolia. They catch the Persians off guard. They reach the city. They cannot take the citadel, which is heavily fortified, but they burn much of the lower city. And in burning Sardis, they burn something else. The famous temple of Cybele, the mother goddess of the region. This is significant. In the ancient world, burning a temple is not merely an act of war. It is a cosmic affront. The Persians will remember the burning of Cybele's temple. They will cite it years later when they burn the Acropolis of Athens. In the ancient mind, these things must balance. But after the initial fire of Sardis, the revolt begins to unravel. On the march back to the coast, the Greeks are intercepted by Persian forces at the Battle of Ephesus. They are routed. The Athenians, having seen enough and perhaps feeling the danger of their position, withdraw their ships and sail home. The revolt is now a purely Ionian affair. For the next 5 years, 5 extraordinary, grinding years, the Ionian cities hold out. They fight on land and sea. They win battles. They lose more. Persia brings its full logistical weight to bear, sending not just soldiers but engineers, administrators, political officers. The Persians are methodical, patient. They reconquer city by city. And slowly the coalition fractures. Unity is the one thing the Greeks have never been good at. City-states that were supposed to fight together squabble over strategy, over resources, over pride. Some cities defect. Others simply stop sending troops. By 494 BC, Miletus, the city where it all began, stands nearly alone. The final confrontation comes at sea, at the Battle of Lade, a small island just offshore from Miletus. The Ionian fleet assembles, 353 triremes. A formidable force, at least on paper. Against them, the Persian fleet of perhaps 600 ships. But before the battle, something devastating happens. The Samians, one of the largest and most important contingents, have already been offered a deal by the Persians. Their tyrants, exiled at the start of the revolt, have been negotiating in secret. And when the fleets finally close for battle, the Samians turn about and sail away, taking with them 11 other contingents who follow in confusion or cowardice. The Chians fight magnificently. The Milesians hold their line. But betrayal is not a wound you can fight through. The Ionian fleet is destroyed. And then Miletus falls. What happens to Miletus is a lesson in Persian imperial justice, if that is even the right word. The men are killed. The women and children are enslaved. The city itself is not razed to the ground. Persian pragmatism recognizes that cities are valuable, but it is gutted of its population. The survivors are resettled in Mesopotamia, near the mouth of the Tigris River. Miletus, one of the great intellectual and commercial cities of the Greek world, the city that produced the philosopher Thales, the man who first proposed that the universe operates by natural laws rather than divine whim, is a ghost town. When the news reaches Athens, Herodotus tells us, a playwright named Phrynichus staged a tragedy about the fall of Miletus. The audience wept. The city fined him 1,000 drachmas and banned the play from ever being performed again. The grief was too raw, too close. The revolt is over. Ionia is pacified. And in Susa, Darius the Great receives the news and makes a decision. Those Athenians, those 20 ships, those people who helped burn Sardis and then went home, they will answer for it. There is a story, possibly apocryphal but too good to abandon, that after being told about the Athenian involvement in the Ionian revolt, Darius the Great called for a bow and arrow. He drew the bow, shot the arrow into the sky, and prayed to his god Ahura Mazda that he might be granted revenge against the Athenians. Then he ordered a servant to stand beside him at every royal dinner and repeat, 3 times before every meal, "Master, remember the Athenians." We do not know if this story is true, but we know what followed from it, and what followed is historically undeniable. Darius begins to plan. Not immediately. The Persian machine has many wheels turning at once. There are revolts in Egypt to suppress, satrapies to administer, infrastructure to build. But the decision is made. Greece will be brought to heel. Athens specifically will be punished. And then the western edge of the empire will be secure. In 492 BCE, the first Persian expedition to Greece is dispatched, under Darius's son-in-law Mardonius. The fleet hugs the northern Aegean coast, reconquering Thrace and Macedonia. But as the fleet rounds the rocky headland of Mount Athos, a violent storm destroys nearly 300 ships and 20,000 men. The expedition is abandoned. Darius sends heralds across Greece, the traditional diplomatic gesture, demanding earth and water. Symbolic tribute. The acknowledgement of Persian sovereignty. Most of the island states comply. Some of the mainland states comply. But Athens? Athens throws the Persian heralds into a pit. And Sparta, in an act of almost casual brutality, throws theirs into a well, with the sardonic suggestion that they could find earth and water down there. The die is now truly cast. There is no walking this back. Athens and Sparta have committed acts of war by ancient diplomatic law. The next expedition will not be a reconnaissance. It will be a punishment. In 490 BCE, a Persian fleet of perhaps 600 ships and 25,000 men under the command of Datis and Artaphernes sets sail across the Aegean. Their orders: subdue the Cycladic islands, neutralize Eretria, and then Athens. They do not fail at the first 2 tasks. Naxos is burned. Delos is treated with ostentatious reverence. The Persians are shrewd enough to honor Apollo's birthplace, knowing the propaganda value of mercy. Eretria, despite a valiant six-day resistance, falls when internal betrayal opens its gates. The Eretrians are enslaved and shipped to Persia. And then the Persian fleet sails for Attica. For the plain of Marathon. The Bay of Marathon is perfect. That is why the Persians chose it. It is a long, flat coastal plain, ideal for cavalry, which is one of the Persian military's greatest advantages. A former tyrant of Athens named Hippias, the very man the Athenians expelled a decade ago, is sailing with the Persian fleet as an advisor, a potential puppet ruler waiting to be reinstalled. And Hippias, who knows Attica intimately, has recommended Marathon. His father, Pisistratos, once used this very bay to land and seize power. History has a dark sense of humor. The Athenians receive the news and mobilize. They send a famous runner, Phidippides, to Sparta, covering the roughly 240 kilometers in 2 days, to beg for military assistance. The Spartans express sympathy, and then they explain that their religious calendar forbids them from marching to war before the full moon. They will come in several days. There are no several days. Athens fields approximately 9,000 to 10,000 hoplites, heavy infantry in bronze armor, armed with 8-foot spears and large round shields. They are joined by roughly 1,000 soldiers from Plataea, a small Boeotian city that had allied with Athens years earlier and would prove, in this moment, to be one of the most loyal friends Athens ever had. Total Greek force, perhaps 10,000 men. Against them, a Persian army estimated at between 20,000 and 30,000, including cavalry, archers, and infantry of several different nationalities. The numbers are disputed by historians, but the disparity is not. The Athenians march to Marathon and take up a defensive position in the hills overlooking the plain. They wait. The Persians wait. For several days, neither side attacks. The Athenians are waiting for Sparta. The Persians may be waiting for traders within Athens to open the city's gates, or for the Athenian nerve to break. Among the 10 Athenian generals, debate rages. Half want to wait. Half want to attack immediately. The deciding vote falls to a man named Callimachus, the war archon, a kind of supreme military commander for the year. And the general who persuades him is a man named Miltiades. Miltiades is fascinating. He is a former tyrant himself. He once ruled Greek settlements in the Thracian Chersonese under Persian suzerainty, until the Ionian revolt made his position untenable and he fled back to Athens. He knows the Persians. He has fought alongside them and against them. And he believes, with the conviction of a man who has studied his enemy carefully, that they can be beaten. His argument: Persian cavalry cannot operate without room to maneuver. If we close the distance fast, very fast, we neutralize their arrows, we prevent their horsemen from flanking us, and we meet them spear to spear. And spear to spear, the Greek hoplite in bronze armor is the finest soldier in the world. The vote is taken. They will attack. What happens on the morning of September 12, 490 BCE, or thereabouts? Ancient chronology is imprecise, is one of the most analyzed battles in military history. The Athenians advance at a run. This is almost unheard of. Hoplite warfare is exhausting. The panoply, helmet, breastplate, greaves, shield, weighs 60 to 90 pounds. Running in full armor for nearly a mile is brutal. The Persian archers, who have been expecting to thin the Greek ranks at a distance, suddenly find that the enemy is already upon them. The Greek line is deliberately thin in the center, where the best Persian troops are stationed, and deliberately strengthened on the flanks. The Persian center pushes through. For a moment, it looks like disaster. But the Greek flanks hold, then advance, then turn inward. The Persian center, victorious in front, finds itself suddenly surrounded. The flanks collapse. The Persian army breaks. The retreat becomes a rout. Survivors race for the ships, pursued by Greeks who cut them down in the shallows. When the dust settles, approximately 6,400 Persians are dead. The Greeks have lost 192 men. Their names are preserved, a remarkable thing, and they were buried on the field in a collective tomb called the Soros. You can visit it today. 192 versus 6,400. The story of a runner being sent from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory, collapsing and dying after gasping, "We have won," is probably a later invention. The word marathon for a long-distance race, though, that gift is real and it comes from this day. But the battle is not over. Not entirely, because the Persian fleet, instead of retreating, sails south and west, rounding the Cape of Attica, heading for Athens itself. Someone has apparently signaled them with a shield, a treasonous act, possibly by the Achaemenid family, though this remains deeply disputed by historians. The Athenian army marches. Having just fought a battle, in full armor, they cover the roughly 40 kilometers back to Athens at a pace that defies belief. And when the Persian fleet arrives at the port of Phalerum, they find the Athenian army already there, waiting on the shore. The Persians look at the army on the beach. They look at each other, and they sail home. Marathon is won. But this is not the end. Everyone knows it is not the end. Darius is alive. And he is furious. The years between Marathon and the Second Persian invasion are a masterclass in how history pivots on individual decisions, and how a democracy, for all its dysfunction, can sometimes produce exactly the leader it needs at exactly the right moment. Darius begins preparations for a massive third expedition. But in 486 BC, Egypt revolts. And then, Darius dies. He is succeeded by his son Xerxes, who spends several years suppressing the Egyptian revolt, then the Babylonian revolt, before finally turning his attention back west. In Athens, something remarkable is happening. A man named Themistocles has been pushing, for years, against enormous political resistance, for Athens to become a naval power. Athens has always been primarily a land power. The hoplite tradition is ancient and honorable. Sailors were lower-class citizens. The naval life had less dignity than standing in the phalanx. But Themistocles understands something his contemporaries are slow to grasp. Persia cannot be stopped on land with Greek numbers. The only way to defend Greece is to contest the sea. Cut off the Persian supply lines, force the fleet to fight on Greek terms in Greek waters, and the enormous Persian land army becomes a logistical nightmare. When the silver mines at Laurion produce an unexpected bonanza around 483 BCE, the Athenian assembly votes on what to do with the windfall. The traditional solution: distribute it to citizens. Themistocles proposes something radical. Use it to build 200 triremes. Against considerable opposition, he wins the vote. Athens builds its fleet. 200 sleek, fast, lethal warships. It is, in retrospect, one of the most consequential political decisions in Greek history. And then there is the oracle at Delphi. When Athens sends envoys to ask the god Apollo how to survive the coming storm, the oracle is terrifying. All will be taken. Fire and the sharp sword will bring your city down. The envoys despair. They go back and ask again, begging for something better. The oracle relents, slightly. It speaks of a wooden wall that will save Athens. And it speaks of divine Salamis, an island in the bay west of Athens. What does wooden wall mean? The conservatives argue it refers to the old wooden palisade on the Acropolis. They counsel defense in place. Themistocles argues, persuasively, brilliantly, that the wooden wall is the fleet. The ships are the wall. And if the ships are the wall, then Athens must be prepared to evacuate the city and fight at sea. The idea that Athens, proud, beautiful, ancient Athens, home of Athena, city of the Acropolis, should be voluntarily abandoned is almost incomprehensible. And yet, gradually, the Athenians come to accept it. Because the alternative is worse. Themistocles also engineers the ostracism of his chief political rival, Aristides, a capable general but a conservative who opposes the naval buildup. With Aristides gone, the fleet program proceeds unimpeded. Greece is not united. It never really is. But in 481 BCE, faced with intelligence reports of what Xerxes is preparing, the major Greek city-states do something unprecedented. They call a congress at Corinth, and they form the Hellenic League, a defensive alliance against Persia. Even Athens and Sparta, the two greatest powers of Greece, who might otherwise spend this decade maneuvering against each other, agree to cooperate. They also do something that speaks to the moral seriousness of the moment. They declare that any Greek state that voluntarily submits to Persia, Medizes as the Greeks call it, will face punishment after the war. No forgiveness for collaboration. The trap is set on both sides. There is no turning back now. What Xerxes assembles is, by the standards of the ancient world, almost incomprehensible in scale. Herodotus gives us a number of 1.7 million soldiers, which modern historians reject as wildly exaggerated. Ancient armies could not have been fed or organized at that scale. But even the more conservative modern estimates suggest a force of 100,000 to 300,000, multiple times larger than anything Greece could field. A fleet of perhaps 1,200 warships, supply ships, horse transports, an entire floating city. To cross the Hellespont, the narrow strait between Asia and Europe, Xerxes orders 2 pontoon bridges to be built of boats lashed together with cables. When a storm destroys the first attempt, Xerxes orders the Hellespont itself to be whipped and branded as punishment for its insolence. His engineers are beheaded. A second bridge is built. It holds. The army crosses. He also orders a canal cut through the peninsula of Mount Athos, that rocky headland that destroyed the first Persian fleet. It takes 3 years and tens of thousands of workers. It still exists today, barely visible as a depression in the landscape. Xerxes does not make the same mistake twice. The Greek strategy, forged in debate and compromise at Corinth, has 2 components. Hold a narrow pass in northern Greece called Thermopylae, where the vast Persian numbers are neutralized by geography, while the Greek fleet engages the Persian fleet at Cape Artemisium, just offshore. If the pass holds and the fleet performs well, Xerxes cannot advance. He will be fighting on 2 fronts, with logistics strained and time working against him. The problem: Sparta will not send its full army. The Carnea, another religious festival, has not yet ended. Sparta sends 300 Spartiates under King Leonidas, along with several thousand allied Peloponnesian soldiers. The whole force numbers perhaps 7,000 men. 7,000 men against an army of at least 100,000. The pass of Thermopylae is narrow, at its tightest point, barely wide enough for a wagon track, pressed between cliffs on one side and the sea on the other. The Greeks fortify an old Phocian wall across the pass. They wait. Xerxes waits 4 days, apparently expecting the Greeks to flee or submit. When they do neither, he sends the Medes forward. They are repulsed. He sends the elite immortals, his 10,000 finest soldiers, his personal guard. They are repulsed. He sends them again and again. For 2 days the pass holds. And then a local man, his name is Ephialtes, and his name will forever mean traitor in the Greek language, approaches the Persian camp. He knows a mountain path, a goat track that loops over the mountains and comes out behind the Greek position. Xerxes sends the immortals up the path that night. When dawn comes on the 3rd day, Leonidas receives the news. He assembles the allied commanders. The position is untenable. He sends most of the allied forces away. They will be needed later. He keeps the Spartiates. He keeps the Thespians, perhaps 700 men from the small city of Thespi who refuse to leave, knowing their city will be destroyed regardless. He keeps the Thebans, perhaps against their will. What follows is history as legend, and legend as history. The Greeks advance from the wall and meet the Persians in the wider part of the pass, fighting with a ferocity born of the knowledge that there is no retreat. Spears break, they fight with swords. Swords break, they fight with hands and teeth, Herodotus tells us. Leonidas falls. 4 times the Persians advance to claim his body, 4 times the Greeks drive them back. When the immortals come through the mountain path and close the trap, it is over. The last Spartans and Thespians die on a small hill, buried under Persian arrows. The epitaph carved over their grave, composed by the poet Simonides, has echoed through 25 centuries. Go, tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Thermopylae is lost, but it has bought time, and something more than time. It has given Greece a story. It has transformed what might have been a demoralizing rout into a sacred sacrifice. The Greeks will fight on. They will fight harder because of this. Xerxes marches south. Athens lies open before him. The Themistocles Decree, if it is authentic, and historians debate this, is one of the most extraordinary documents from the ancient world. It orders the total evacuation of Athens. Every man, woman, child, and slave. The able-bodied men to the fleet. Everyone else to Treason, Salamis, and Aegina, across the water, out of reach. Can you imagine it? Packing everything you can carry. Abandoning your house, your olive trees, your grandfather's tomb. Loading the elderly and the children onto boats. Looking back at the Acropolis, the temple of Athena, the sacred olive tree, the stone that has been the heart of your city for generations, and sailing away from it. Some refused. Old men, too proud or too stubborn to leave, barricaded themselves on the Acropolis behind wooden barriers, the literal wooden wall, they insisted, of the oracle. Thieves and the very poor, who had nothing to lose, also stayed. When the Persians arrived, they burned it all. The wooden barriers, the old men who defended them, and then, with systematic deliberateness, the temples. The Acropolis burned. The great city of Athens, the most culturally vibrant city in the Greek world, was ash and rubble. In the modern world, we might call this a psychological operation. Xerxes wanted the Greeks to see the smoke. He wanted them to know that Athens was gone. He wanted the fleet anchored off Salamis to lose heart. But Themistocles had planned for this moment. And he had one more move to make. The Greek fleet at Salamis is in crisis. The Peloponnesian commanders, particularly the Corinthians, want to retreat south to the Isthmus of Corinth, where a wall is being built. They argue that fighting at Salamis, in the narrow straits between the island and the mainland, is a gamble. Better to defend the isthmus, where Spartan land forces can anchor the defense. Themistocles knows this is fatal. A retreat south abandons the sea entirely. The Persian fleet can sail around the Peloponnese, land wherever it wishes, and the wall at the isthmus becomes irrelevant. The only way to win is here, in these waters, where the Persian numerical advantage is neutralized by geography, just as at Thermopylae. He argues. He pleads. He threatens. And when none of it seems to work, Themistocles does something that borders on genius and treachery simultaneously. He sends a secret message to Xerxes. The message, delivered by a trusted slave named Sisinus, tells Xerxes that the Greek fleet is about to flee, that Themistocles himself, a friend of Persia, is tipping him off. If Xerxes moves now, seals the exits from the straits, he can trap the whole fleet and destroy it in one blow. Xerxes believes the message. Why wouldn't he? Greek unity has always been fragile. Betrayal is expected. The Persian fleet moves in the night to seal the straits. Egyptian squadrons block the western exit. The main fleet rows into the narrows from the east. And the Greek commanders, learning that they are now surrounded, that retreat is no longer an option, have no choice but to fight. Which is exactly what Themistocles wanted. The Battle of Salamis is fought in September 480 BC. Xerxes himself watches from a golden throne on a hillside above the strait. His commanders have promised him a triumph, and he wants to witness it personally. What he witnesses is not a triumph. The Persian fleet, massive and numerically superior, is strangled by the geography. The straits are too narrow. Ships cannot maneuver. The Phoenician and Egyptian galleys, used to open water fighting, are jammed against each other. The Greek triremes, smaller and more maneuverable, ram and withdraw, ram and withdraw. Xerxes watches his fleet collapse. Ship after ship is rammed and sunk. Sailors who cannot swim, and many Persian sailors cannot, drown in the narrow waters. By the end of the day, perhaps 200 Persian ships are destroyed. The Greek losses are a fraction of that. Xerxes sits on his throne and watches it happen. There is nothing he can do. After Salamis, Xerxes makes a decision. He will return to Persia. The fleet is damaged. The supply lines are strained. The threat of the Greek fleet cutting off his pontoon bridge over the Hellespont is real. He leaves a substantial army under his general Mardonius to winter in Thessaly and finish the job in the spring. But he goes home. The greatest king in the world has been turned back by a coalition of squabbling city-states. The Mediterranean world is stunned. Spring comes, and with it Mardonius. In 479 BCE, the Persian army marches south again. Athens is occupied a second time, burned a second time. And again the Athenians evacuate, though by now the evacuation has a practiced, heartbreaking routine to it. Mardonius sends peace envoys to Athens. His offer is generous by Persian standards: autonomy, reconstruction funding, territorial additions. Athens would be a privileged satrap, not a conquered ruin. The Athenians just have to accept Persian sovereignty. Athens refuses. When the Spartan envoys, worried about what Athens might decide, come to observe the negotiations, the Athenian assembly gives one of the great speeches of ancient history, preserved by Herodotus, explaining that they cannot submit to Persia because of their shared Greek blood, their shared language, their shared gods, and the graves of their ancestors. As long as the sun holds its course, they say, we will not make terms with Xerxes. But then, needing Spartan troops, they remind Sparta quite pointedly that the Spartans have been taking a long time to arrive. The Athenian patience is not infinite. They have refused an excellent deal. They need partners. Sparta, finally, marches. They send their full army, 5,000 Spartiates, the maximum they had ever committed outside the Peloponnese, along with tens of thousands of allied and Helot soldiers. The two armies meet in Boeotia, near the city of Plataea. Mardonius chooses favorable ground on the Esopus plain. The Greeks take the foothills. What follows is one of the most tactically confusing battles in ancient history: days of skirmishing, supply disruption, a disastrous Greek night retreat that leaves the different contingents separated and confused at dawn. Mardonius, seeing the Greek lines apparently broken, orders a general advance. It is his last decision. The Spartans, caught in the open during the retreat, hold their position under arrow fire. Herodotus tells us they stood in formation, shields up, as men fell around them, waiting for the omens from sacrifice to be favorable. When the omens finally come right, they advance. Mardonius himself charges forward on his white horse at the head of his elite Persian infantry. He is killed, whether by a stone, a spear, or a Spartan named Eumnestus who Plutarch credits with the blow. The sources disagree. But he dies. And when Mardonius dies, the Persian army breaks. The rout is complete. The survivors flee to the great fortified camp Mardonius has built and barricade themselves behind its wooden walls. The walls are breached. The slaughter is enormous. Of the estimated 300,000 Persian soldiers who wintered in Greece, Herodotus's numbers, likely inflated, very few make it back across the Hellespont. On the same day, tradition tells us, the Greek fleet destroys what remains of the Persian navy at the Battle of Mycale on the Ionian coast. On the same day, land and sea, east and west, Persia's military power in the Aegean is extinguished. There is a question historians return to again and again, and it is worth sitting with before we close. What would the world look like if Persia had won? It is tempting to be dismissive of this question. Counterfactual history is slippery. But the consequences of a Persian victory are not entirely speculative. They follow logically from what we know. A Persian Greece would have been a Persian Greece. Tributary, pacified, administered. The democratic experiments in Athens, the direct democracy that was barely 20 years old in 490 BC, would almost certainly have been replaced by tyranny, as had happened to the Ionian cities. The radical idea that citizens could govern themselves, that law could be made by popular assembly rather than by divine mandate, would have been extinguished in its cradle. Philosophy would not have flourished as it did. Socrates was born around 470 BCE, a child when the Persians were driven out. Plato and Aristotle came after him. The particular intellectual conditions that produced them, the open democratic debate, the questioning of authority, the freedom to challenge received wisdom in public, those conditions were Athenian. A Persian Athens does not produce them. Drama. The theater as a civic art form, as a way of processing collective trauma and joy and moral complexity, Aeschylus fought at Marathon. He considered it the most important thing he had ever done, more important than the plays that made him immortal. A Persian victory might have preserved Aeschylus the man, but it would not have preserved the conditions that made the theater of Athens possible. And beyond culture, the political inheritance, the very language of democracy, of voting, of citizens, of public deliberation, comes from this tradition. Rome would inherit it, imperfectly but meaningfully. The American founders read Thucydides. The French revolutionaries debated Sparta versus Athens. The idea that legitimate government requires the consent of the governed. That idea has Greek roots. Deep ones. None of this is to romanticize Athens. Athens kept slaves. Athens oppressed women. Athens could be brutal, imperialistic, arrogant. The democracy that defeated Persia was a democracy of free male property owners, not a democracy we would recognize today. History is complicated. It is always complicated. But the seed that was planted, the possibility, the experiment, the proof that it could be done, that matters. It mattered then. It matters now. And it almost didn't happen. It almost didn't happen because of the 20 Athenian ships that went to Ionia and burned Sardis. Because of a desperate opportunist named Aristagoras who started a revolt he couldn't finish. Because of a runner who covered 240 kilometers in 2 days to ask for help. Because of 300 Spartans in a mountain pass. Because of a man who tricked his own allies into fighting by sending a false message to the enemy. History is made of such moments. Accidents, miscalculations, desperate gambles. The difference between victory and oblivion is often not grand historical forces, but the choices of specific human beings at specific moments of crisis. The Greeks chose to fight. And the world, our world, is different because of it. The echoes of that choice would shape the next 500 years. And the 500 years after that. And the 2000 after those. We are, in ways we rarely stop to consider, still living in the long aftermath of a September morning on a plain called Marathon, when a small army ran toward the largest empire on Earth, and the empire broke. If you made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. Stories like this one, of unlikely resistance, of civilizations at the knife's edge, of the specific human decisions that changed everything, these are the reason history is worth studying. Not because the past is a map to the future. It isn't. But because it reminds us that the world is not inevitable. Things could have gone differently. They sometimes do. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Persian Wars, the comment section is where I'd love to hear from you. What part surprised you? What do you wish we'd covered in more depth? Thermopylae? Themistocles? The Ionian cities after the war? Let me know. And if you're new here, this channel exists for exactly this kind of storytelling. Long-form history, told the way it deserves to be told. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. Because next time, we're going somewhere equally extraordinary. I'll see you there.